everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Tachlis. It's been a while. I'm sitting here at the port of Jaffa, waiting to welcome so many of you back to Israel, hopefully starting from next week. It's been nearly 2 years since we have all been separated from each other, and I know we cannot wait to welcome you back home to Israel with a great big Wizo hug. But today I have a very, very special treat. As you know, we only get the most dynamic, special people here on Talking Tachlis. And I'm sitting here with a fierce, fabulous, feminist, Zionist queen, social media superstar, Emily Schrader, CEO of Lite Creative. Emily, welcome to Talking Tachlis.
Thanks so much for coming to Tel Aviv.
Now, you speak a language that is super sexy to so many of us. Apart from being on our social media and somebody who we can really follow and get not just information but inspiration from, you speak a language that we love. You talk all about those sexy things like feminism and Zionism. Now, when you think about feminism and Zionism, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think a lot of things that people don't understand about both feminism and Zionism, which are both largely misunderstood, is that they're kind of cut from the same cloth. You know, they're almost the same thing in that they're these movements that have been demonized as something that they're not. What is feminism? It's the idea that women should be equal. That's it. It doesn't have to be anything radical. It isn't anything revolutionary, and yet people demonize it as if it is such. The radical idea that women should be equal. Well, in the same sense, Zionism is the same thing. Zionism doesn't mean displace other people. It doesn't mean Palestinians can't have a state even. The only thing Zionism means is that Jews have the right to self-determination. Jews have the right to equality, just like any other people, just like feminism. So I think that this is something that brings both of these ideologies together, and people miss that. And in fact, it's been, we've had people claiming to be feminists demonizing Zionism. So it's really, really important that we understand that these really have a shared value in that they're incredibly important movements for our society today as women or as Jews or even as non-Jews, and that we need to be vocal about speaking out and supporting this and correcting the demonization if and when it occurs.
Now, the demonization is largely a new phenomenon. You know, when we speak about feminism as Wizo women around the world, this is something that we've been doing as a movement for over 100 years now. We've done really sexy things like sneak in weapons into Israel during the building of the state while entertaining British soldiers so that we could be part of the forming of the state. We have really formed the backbone of the building of this country through schools, through projects, through various different issues. Today we are very active in places like the Knesset, working for gender parity. We have shelters that deal with gender-based violence. But one area that we see where feminism and Zionism are coming under attack is they're meeting at the intersection, or what we call intersectionality, where, if you're suffering racism, then you must be suffering discrimination as a woman. But somehow, for some bizarre reason, I couldn't fathom what it could be, anti-Semitism. It seems that when we talk about Zionism and feminism, there seems to be a push to exclude feminist Zionist voices from the conversation. And you've had a lot of experience in trying to push back against that and encourage conversation. Share with our Chaverot and Chaverim men, we know you love this too and you want to be involved. Share some of your experiences and your takeaways from this.
Right, so as you know, my background is in digital marketing and social media, so I spend a lot of my time doing activism online, whether it's content creation or just Twitter itself. I'm very active online, and so I've seen some of the worst of humanity, because that is the internet, about any group of people, but in particular against women. And one of the things, the trends that I've noticed in the last few years that's been rising is that the so-called progressive movement is pushing out feminists. And of course this isn't progressive at all, but that is a trend that we've seen as a result of some of the leaders of the Women's March, which was a huge movement in the United States and then eventually throughout the rest of the world as well, calling for equality for women. And unfortunately, the loudest voices in this, not the majority, but the loudest voices in this, were people like Linda Sarsour and Tamika Mallory, who have continuously been caught up in anti-Semitic scandals with the comments that they've made and alliances that they have with people like Louis Farrakhan, who calls Jews the devil, and just crazy, very, very inappropriate stuff. And there's been a concerted effort by these people to push Jews out of the conversation, despite the fact that, historically speaking, male or female, Jews are literally the most oppressed minority group in the history of the world. But somehow they want to put Jews in this camp of people who have privilege, or the oppressor, and everyone else in the category of the oppressed, even though it doesn't make sense, especially when it comes to Israel and the history of the Jewish people. So I think that one of the things that I've dealt with is having to push back against that as someone who is very proudly and outspokenly feminist, and saying this is completely unacceptable. I would argue that you can't be a feminist and not be a Zionist, contrary to what some of the leaders of the Women's March said, because of what I explained before.
And they're both very, very progressive values.
Exactly. These are movements that shouldn't be revolutionary, but unfortunately are, in a way. The demand that Jews have equality, that women have equality. These are the same things. And society historically doesn't really want to accept this. You know, there's a strong resistance to accepting this as the social norm. And unfortunately, we still see this with women in certain places, and we still see it with Jews. And the fact that a movement that claims to be calling for the equality of women is then excluding Jewish women, or wants to exclude Jewish women because they believe in equality for their people, is just ridiculous.
Now, earlier in May, Israel went on a defensive operation against over 4,000 rockets that were fired from the Gaza Strip onto our civilian populations. And one thing that we saw was almost an emergence of an attack on Jewish women and their Jewish identity on places like Twitter, and you were one that really experienced the proverbial social media pylon. Can you share some of your experiences, some of the accusations that were made against you and ways that you fought back?
Sure. So, as you know, this time on social media was probably worse than it's ever been. I've been involved in this activity since 2008, and then there was hardly any social media when it came to Israel's operations, in particular with Gaza. In 2012, we saw more activity. 2014, even more activity. This was really the highest amount of activity that we've ever seen. And that also translated to anti-Semitism online. We saw a lot of hatred against Jews, which is something that we hadn't seen before. A lot of times it's couched in anti-Zionism, which of course I would argue is anti-Semitism. This time it was much more explicit than it's ever been. So it was against Jews explicitly, and we saw that translate to in person as well, anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks. Now, when it comes to being a woman online, I was very vocal and active throughout this operation on Twitter and on other platforms, and I actually was targeted by a organized campaign from Malaysia of anti-Israel activists who spammed my accounts and tried to hack my accounts multiple times. There was an open call on the dark web to hack my accounts. They sent me over 10,000 tweets in one day from different accounts. And these weren't like, oh, free Palestine, like the normal spam comments that you get when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict online. They were very sexist, misogynistic, and aggressive. I got rape threats, I got death threats, I got very explicit and inappropriate sexual messages. And unfortunately, this is the type of rhetoric that a lot of women who are very vocal experience when they speak about Israel and about Zionism online. I know I'm not the only one who's experienced it. I may have been one of the most dramatic cases, so don't be afraid if you also want to be active. But it does happen. And the thing is that it isn't necessarily unique to anti-Semitism. I think it's more severe. But other women who are vocal about other causes also face the same opposition. You know, women in office, in public office, no matter what the country, even very progressive countries like Finland and Denmark, they face a lot more hate on social media than men do. So
let's just talk about, while we're on the subject of women who maybe are not even Jewish facing some abuse. Israel is going to host the Miss Universe pageant. in a short while. We'll see a bevy of beauties worth their tiaras and sashes come to the southern city of Lite and all vie for the crown of Miss Universe. And we can have discussions about whether or not beauty pageants are still relevant, but it does provide a platform for women from around the world to meet with each other, to engage, and very importantly to us, to see Israel, to see the situation on the ground, well, as much as possible that you can from a luxury resort in Eilat, but to hear maybe from Israelis about the situation. But now we've had an interesting interaction where Chief Mandela is calling for a boycott from beauty queens coming to Israel, because he believes Israel's an apartheid state. And now we've seen the pylon with another very, very famous, very pro-Israel lady, Sarah Idan. Tell us what you've seen on social media with Sarah.
So basically what happened, as you said, Mandela called for a boycott of the Miss Universe pageant, even though there's no justification whatsoever for that, but that's another issue. And Sarah Idan, who's actually the former Miss Iraq, so from an Arab country that does not have peace with Israel, she participated, I think it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, in the Miss Universe pageant herself and became friends with Miss Israel. Now this in and of itself prompted a lot of criticism. She faced a lot of backlash even then from other people on social media. So we've seen this trend happen before. Now she's spoken out against Mandela's comments, saying that calling on the participants not to listen to that, not to give in to divisive movements like the BDS movement, and to go to Israel and use the opportunity to build allies with people who are different than you, from different countries, who have different experiences. Use this as an opportunity for peace. And not to be cliche about world peace, but it really is an opportunity. And in response, she's faced a huge backlash on social media of, ironically, anti-Semitism, even though she is Arab herself, Arab Muslim, and she's getting a lot of hate and a lot of threats. People saying, oh, I wish Saddam should have finished the job. Comments like this, wildly inappropriate, sexist comments about how she looks and how she's dumb because she's beautiful, and all of these comments on social media only for the sole reason because she doesn't think that people should boycott Israel. So it's interesting that we see this hatred, this irrational hatred of Jews translate even to our allies, even to people who stand in solidarity and are just saying completely logically, listen, I don't support a boycott. That's not the way to make change, even if you disagree with Israel. So
the important message I'm getting out of this is also that we have allies who stand in solidarity. And I know that for many of you out there watching this, social media speaking out is very intimidating. Perhaps for many of you out in your federations, in your countries, you don't want to draw attention to yourself by being active or by sharing your voice. But I think that it's important that we do, because when each of us come together and we come together as a collective, we can really, really accomplish a lot. But now you are the expert in social media. I know this because I follow every step that you take, not in a stalky, creepy way, but in a way to learn. Are there any tips and tools that you can share with our chaverot out there around the world looking to be more active, looking to share their voices, looking for the right platforms and places where they should be present?
So first of all, I encourage everyone to be very, very active on social media in general, because the most important thing, everything on social media is a numbers game at the end of the day. The more likes, even small activity like likes, that you have on a post, the more it's going to be seen. This is one of the ways that anti-Semites and different hate movements, also, racist, anti-LGBTQ, these movements have been effective online because they're very active, even if it's small movements. So if you're not a person who writes or does video or anything like that, you can still be active and make a difference online. So that's the first thing, to engage in the first place. The second thing is to be smart about it. Not everyone is comfortable dealing with hate or being an activist at the level that I am. If you are, great, keep going and know that there's other people like me who back you and support you. If not, you can also make profiles that aren't in your name, that don't show your face or that don't include your last name. This is one tactic that you can use. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that it's really important that you support other voices who are vocal online. So even if you're not the person yourself who wants to engage in content, you should support other people and engage with them as well and retweet other women who are being vocal about that. This is something that a lot of people miss on social media. They think, oh my gosh, I don't know how to edit video, or I'm not a graphic designer. How can I engage? How can I make things? This is a very, very easy way to do it. Another important thing to remember that I actually forgot about before is that whenever you're engaging online, and this goes for anything, but obviously if you're going to be an activist online, is ensuring that your accounts are secure. So setting up two-step verification on all of your social media platforms will help from getting hacked if somebody does target you, like what happened with me. Now, I've never actually been hacked, but I know that a lot of people have tried. So just keep that in mind. That's a pretty easy and basic step that you can get. Basically, you get a text to confirm your login. And you can do this on any of your social media accounts. So those are my tips for engaging on social media. And I don't want to scare you by some of the things that I've experienced. Most people will not experience this, but we do need your voices. So if you can be active online, support others, engage in small ways, or engage in big ways if you have the ability, do whatever you can to help this fight.
Emily Schrader, CEO of Socialite Creative. Tell us where we can find you online.
So on Twitter, it's Emily K. Schrader. On every other platform, it's Emily in Tel Aviv, as you can see.
Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us on Talking Tachlis. Thank you so much for all the work that you are doing for women and for Israel. A big thank you to our Monique behind the camera, making sure that we behave ourselves and everything goes out. From myself, Rolene Marks, head of Hasbara, public diplomacy for World Wizo. I want to say shalom, nitwaot, and looking forward to seeing you in Tel Aviv soon.